Hello, Jay. You are present. Excited. I found out I get to go rafting this weekend or kayaking. Woo-hoo! It's almost summertime. Pure, joyous day filled with awesome. Hello. That stinks. I wanted it to power up. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got about a minute and a half until we come in. Who else is representing? We got 4. I got Jay. I got Jensen. I've got Mr. O. Who else is on this hearing right now? Come and say hello. Come and be with us. Second day working in the classroom. Those of you who are homebodies and teammates, you're probably there. I've got my journal. I've got my time for verbal to visual. We're starting. I am about ready in about 19 seconds to get you started, to get us warmed up. I got my book, Tale of Despereaux. I got a comfortable spot. Mag, you showed up. Woo-hoo! It's like a team. I love when somebody new walks in. Somebody new, somebody here. It's good to see you. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is 3:33 on my clock, and that means it's time to turn off the music. Time to get on to chapter 36. Last time we spoke, I had a really nice conversation with a few people regarding yesterday's reading. I hope the graphic content wasn't too graphic for you. I wanted to touch base. There were a few people who yelled at me at my morning meeting this morning, telling them, actually, Maverick F was one of them who shared with me that he was a little sadder than I had led him on to be. He was a lot sad in regards to the fact that the cook, probably like the clout did for Miss Miggery. I wanted to remind you about the fact that our main character was hiding in a napkin while he listened to a terrible plan unfold that included our main rat of the dungeon, Roscuro, as well as the newest character, Miggery, who has been looking for a friend ever since we've met her, ever since she was much, much, much younger. Her greatest dream to some of us is what? To become a princess? Kind of like the one that I used to have. The other thing that we must remind ourselves is Miggery was told to attack the mouse that popped out of the napkin when they happened to go into the kitchen and clean up the tray from feeding the dungeon master Gregory downstairs. And out from that popped our man Despereaux. And as Despereaux popped out, the cook said, "Kill him!" And at all costs, Miggery went after him. But because he was covered in oil, she slipped out, but did lose a little piece. Dreaming about was wearing shining armor, and then when he opened it up and he disclothed the armor, he realized there was nothing. The armor. Who is that armor made for, do you think, in his dream? When he wakes up, my question will be, is he going to feel his tail, or is he going to get chased out, or is he going to find a nice escape route? Other questions that I have right now, the P is going to have some revenge done on her from Roscuro, including Miggery, so we need to pay close attention to that. And without further ado, the knight in at least our armor, Despereaux, is at least in the sunlight. So let's find out where we go from here. Ladies and gentlemen, chapter 36 of Kate DiCamillo's incredibly well-written book, The Tale of Despereaux. And welcome to the classroom again. I had to reread To the Gargoyle last night. I had to reread to Eggman last night because those two were a lot sad that I had skipped out on them. Chapter 36. I'm going to go back just a little bit to remind myself. Remember, this is what happened at the end of chapter 35. just so that you can remember where we left off. No, oh no, said Despereaux. There is no knight in shining armor. It's all just make-believe, like happily ever after. And in his sleep, reader, the small mouse began to cry. Chapter 36, What Mig Carried. And while the mouse slept, Roscuro put his terrible plan into effect. Would you like to hear, reader, how it all unfolded? The story is not a pretty one. There is violence in it, so be prepared, and cruelty, but stories that are not pretty have a certain value too, I suppose. Everything, as you well know, having lived in this world long enough to have figured out a thing or two for yourself, cannot always be sweetness and light. Listen, this is how it happened. First, the rat finished, once and for all, the job that he had started long ago. He chewed through Gregory's rope, all the way through it, so that the jailer became lost in the maze of the dungeon. Late at night, when the castle was dark, the serving girl, Miggery climbed the stairs to the princess's room. In her hand, she carried a candle. And in the pockets of her apron were two very ominous things. In the right pocket, hidden in case that they should encounter anyone on the stairs, was a rat with a spoon on his head and a cloak of red around his shoulders. In the left pocket was a kitchen knife, the same knife that Miggery had tried to use to cut off the tail of a certain mouse that you know so well. These were the things, a rat and a knife and a candle, that Mig carried with her as she climbed up the stairs. Go! She shouted to the rat. It's dark, ain't it? Yes, yes, whispered Roscuro from her pocket. It is quite dark, my dear. When I'm princess, Mig began. Shh, said Roscuro. May I suggest that you keep your glorious plans for the future to yourself? And may I further suggest that you keep your voice down to a whisper? We are, after all, on a covert mission. Do you know how to whisper, my dear? I do, shouted Mig. Shh, then please, said Roscuro, please, institute this knowledge immediately. Go, whispered Mig. All right. Thank you, whispered Roscuro. Do I need to review with you again our plan of action? I got it all straight right here in the head, whispered Mig, and she tapped the side of her head with one finger. How comforting, said Roscuro. Perhaps, my dear, we should go over it once again. One more time, just to be sure. Well, said Mig, we go into the princess's room. She'll be sleeping and snoozing and snoring, and I will wake her up and show her the knife and say, if you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me. And you will not hurt her, said Roscuro. No, I won't, because I want her to live so that she can be my lady-in-waiting when I become the princess. Exactly, said Roscuro. That will be her divine cuppence. Go, whispered Mig. Yes, her divine comeuppance. Mig had, of course, no idea what the phrase divine comeuppance meant, but she very much liked the sound of it, and she repeated it over and over to herself until Roscuro said, and then, continued Mig, I tells her to go out of her princess bed and come with me on a little journey. Ha, said Roscuro, a little journey. That is right, ha. I love the understatement of that phrase. A little journey, oh, and it will be a little journey, indeed it will. And then, said Mig, who was now coming to her favorite part of the plan, we take her to the princess, and when we is all done studying up, we switch places. I gets to be the princess, and she gets to be the maid. Go! Reader, this is the very plan that Roscuro presented to Mig when he first met her. It was, of course, a ridiculous plan. No one would ever, not for one blind minute, mistake Mig for the princess or the princess for Mig. But Miggery, as I pointed out to you before, was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Idiom. And, reader, too, She wanted so desperately to become a princess. She wanted, oh, how she wanted. And it was because of this terrible wanting that she was able to believe in Roscuro's plans with every ounce of her heart. The rat's real plan was, in a way, more simple and more terrible. He intended to take the princess to the deepest, darkest part of the dungeon. He intended to have Mig put chains on the princess's hands and her feet, and he intended to keep the glimmering, glittering, glowing, laughing, happy, joyous princess there in the dark forever. Now, before I begin any further, I need to ask a very important question. How do you feel about that plan? Are you looking forward to that plan? Do you look forward to the Princess P being chained in the deep downs? By the way, what's happening with Gregory, now that he doesn't have his rope? Roscuro is a rat, a true rat. Does he deserve any of our feelings? I need to turn on my light again. Otherwise, I won't read so well. Come on, come on. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. I apologize. Thank goodness this room has electric lights. Those of you who wish you could be back here, me too. Hey, Sean Brown, good to see you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue reading. It is a blessing to be here. Chapter 37, A Small Taste. She was asleep. She? Who? Yeah. The author means you to think about who that she is. She was asleep. Must be the princess. She was asleep and dreaming of her mother, the queen. Another clue that we are talking about the princess. She was asleep and dreaming of her mother, the queen, who was holding out a spoon to her and saying, "Taste this, my sweet. Taste this, P. Taste this, my darling, and tell me what you think." The princess leaned forward and sipped some soup from the spoon her mother held out to her. "Oh, Mama," she said, "it's wonderful. It's the best soup I have ever eaten." "Yes," said the queen. "It is wonderful, isn't it?" "May I have some more?" said the pea. "I gave you a small taste so that you would not forget." And said her mother, "I gave you a small taste so that you would remember." "I want more." But as soon as the princess said this, her mother was gone. She disappeared, and the bowl and the soup spoon disappeared along with her. "Lost things," said the pea. "More lost things." And then she heard her name. She turned, happy, thinking that her mother had come back. But the voice was not her mother's. The voice belonged to somebody else, and it was coming from some place far, far away, and it was telling her to wake up, wake up, wake up. The pea slowly opened her eyes and saw Miggery Sow standing over her bed, a knife in one hand and a candle in the other. "Mig?" she said. "Cool," said Mig softly. "Say it," commanded Roscuro. Mig closed her eyes and shouted her piece. "If you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me." "Whatever for?" said the princess in an annoyed tone. As I have noted before, the princess was not a person who was used to being told what to do. "What are you talking about?" P asked. Meg opened her eyes and shouted, "You got to come with me, so after we take some lessons—" Roscuro from Meg's pocket. No, you're doing it wrong." "Who said that?" "Your Highness," said Roscuro, as he crawled out of Meg's pocket and made his way up to her shoulder and situated himself there, laying his tail across her neck to balance himself. "Your Highness," he said again, and he raised the spoon slowly off of his head and smiled, displaying his mouth full of truly hideous yellow teeth. "I think it would be best if you do as Miggery Sow suggests. She is, as you can quite clearly see, in a possession of a knife that you are royalty. And you will bleed, I assume, just like any other human." The pea looked at Mig. Mig smiled. The knife glinted in the light of the candle. "Mig," she said, her voice shaking the tiniest bit. "I really do not think," said Roscuro, "that Mig would need much persuasion to use that knife on you, princess. She is a dangerous individual, easily led." "But we are friends," said P. "Aren't we, Meg?" "Aye," said Meg. "Trust me," said Roscuro. You're not friends, and I think it would be best if you addressed all your communications to me, Princess. I am the one in charge here. Look at me." The pea looked right directly at the rat and at the spoon on his head. Her heart skipped one beat and then two. "Do you know me, Princess?" "No," she said, lowering her head. I don't know you." But reader, she did know him. And he was the rat who had fallen into her mother's soup. And he was wearing her dead mother's spoon. "I don't know you," she said, "and I'm afraid to look at you." The pea raised her head slowly. Her eyes were defiant. She stared at the rat. "Very well," said Roscuro. "Have it your way. You do not know me. Nonetheless, you must do as I say, as my friend here has a knife. So get out of bed, Princess. We're going on a little journey. I would like it if you would dress in your loveliest gown, the one that you were wearing at the banquet not so long ago. And put on your crown," said Meg. "Put that on your prince's head." "Yes," said Roscuro. "Please, Princess, do not forget your crown." The pea, still staring at Roscuro, pushed the cup. "Ignorant, oh, so ignorant. I am afraid of your fate." The princess took a gown from her closet. "Yes," said Roscuro to himself, "that's the one. The very one. Look at how it sparkles in the light. Lovely. I will need someone to do my buttons," said the princess as she stepped into the dress. "Meg, you must help me." "Little princess," said Roscuro, "do you think that you can outsmart a rat? Our dear Miggery Sow will not lay down her knife, not even for a moment. Will you, Miggery Sow? Because that might ruin your chances of becoming a princess. Isn't that right? And let the rat crawl over her back, doing her buttons for her, one by one." The princess held very still. The only movement she allowed herself was this. She licked her lips over and over again, because she thought that she could taste there the sweet saltiness of the soup that her mother had fed her in her dream. You do remember she was having a dream, don't you, reader? "I have not forgotten, Mamma," she whispered. "I have not forgotten you. I have not forgotten soup." Chapter 38. To the Dungeon. To the dungeon. Chapter 38. Roscuro hid himself again in the pocket of Meg's apron, and Meg pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. Pause. Have you noticed how many times within this story things are stated 3 times? Down, down, down. They went up, up, up. Do you notice that a lot of things in the American story world have 3s? The 3 little pigs, the 3 blind mice. Things come in rules of 3 sometimes. Native American stories have a tendency to come in sets of 4. But in America, we have a tendency to have sets of 3. Pay attention to the number of times the rule of 3 shows up when we're reading. Pay attention to that. Sorry, I have to make sure. Down, down, down. Sometimes I lose my place when I'm reading, and I have to go back and reread things. The princess was led to her fate. As around her, everyone slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming that his wife, the queen, was a bird with green and gold feathers who kept calling his name, Philip, 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 without ceasing. Cook slept in a too-small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that he could not find. "Where did I put that?" he mumbled in his sleep. "Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favorite soup. I must find it." And not far from the cook, in the pantry, atop a bag of flour, slept the mouse Despereaux, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armor, of darkness, and of light. And in the whole of the darkened, sleeping castle, there was only the light. We have not talked about the heart of a princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were these, a very small, very hot, burning coal of hatred for the rat who was responsible for her mother's death. And the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a deep sadness that her mother was dead, and that the princess could now only talk to her in her dreams. And what of the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I am pleased to tell you that the P was a kind and generous person, and perhaps more importantly, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forcibly taken to a dungeon, when you have a large knife pointed at your back, when you are trying to be brave, you are able still to think for a moment of the person who is holding that knife. You are able to think, oh, poor Mig. She wants to be a princess so badly, and she thinks that this is the way. Poor Mig. What must it be like to want something that desperately? That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart: hatreds, sorrows, kindness, and empathy. The heart that she carried inside of her as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen. And finally, just as the sky outside the castle began to become light, down into the dark of the dungeon with the rat and the serving girl. We've read 200 pages. We started this a week ago. I repeat, a week and a day ago, and we are on page 200. That's the kind of reader you are when you choose to give 35 minutes every afternoon. Thank you for doing that. Have I said that yet? Have I said thank you for being here? I'd do this anyway, even if you weren't, but I'm going to tell you, I love that you're here. I'm so grateful. Chapter 39. Missing. I wonder who's missing. Well, I think we already have the answer, and that's why I was kind of wondering in a silly kind of way. Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Migurisao had done. And finally, Despereaux awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. I haven't seen her, Louise was shouting. And I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail gone, given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stub. And more foul play, Gregory dead? Shouted Cook. Poor old man, the rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the darkness and frightened to death because of it. It's too much. By morning. Did you just hear that? Gregory's dead. By morning. That morning. It was only the night before that his rope was chewed. That morning, he just died overnight of fright because his rope was clipped by Roscuro. Oh no, whispered Despereaux. Oh no, Gregory is dead. The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down from the ship. Beside him stood a tall woman jangling a ring of keys. That's right, said Louise. All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon, and when they came back up, who do they have with them? They have with them the old man, dead. And now you tell me that Meg is missing? Princess was gone. What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses? And queens, my goodness. Excuse me, I'm in the middle of reading. So sorry. That's right, said Louise. All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon when they came back up. Who do they have with them? They have that old man dead. And now they tell me Meg is missing, and I say, who cares? Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses? Queens drop dead, and we cannot even take comfort in soup. And with this, Cook began to cry. I love you, Connie. Thank you. Wow, it's been a very busy session of time, has it not? A very busy session of time. Sorry, electronics. Sorry, just had a couple interviews, or disruptions. Shh, said Louise. I beg you, do not say that word. Soup, shouted Cook. I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, 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 soup. And then he began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. There, said Louise. She put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. It'll be all right, said Louise. Cook brought the hem of his apron, to wipe at his tears. "It won't," he said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess." Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken aloud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating person as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around his shoulders. "What will we do? What will we do?" wailed Cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time. Any way for him to cry, he knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon. And being somewhat smarter than Miggery Sow, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Mig could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so, the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and passed the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Yes, day. Mouse sitting around their piece of wood, debating important mouse matters. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. "Sorry, Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon," said one. "Excuse me," said another. "I didn't hear right," said a third. "I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost. A ghost!" And he raised a shaking paw and pointed at Despereaux. And there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck, like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester. "Son, you have come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had been gone only a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling. "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No!" called the most very honored head mouse. "No! I've destroyed us again. No, do not ask the ghost to forgive you. Lester, you did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. "Forgive me," said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, I think, is something very much like hope and love, a powerful, most wonderful thing, and a ridiculous thing as well. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to also think that a mouse could ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, hear at the words that Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, "I forgive you, Pa. I forgive you." And then he turned from his father and spoke to the entire mouse council. "You were wrong," he said, "all of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent." Never! He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Did not matter at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. "Mice of the council," he said, "we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye. You've got 13 witnesses to an experience like this. Do you remember the last time that the head mouse did a vote? Do you remember? I remember all of them said aye. Let's see what happens next. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw. Mouse of the council, we will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye. And from the members of the mouse council, there came a tiny but empathetic chorus, a chorus of ayes. A chorus is not just one. A chorus is a group, just like if you've ever seen a group called the chorus singers. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father, Lester. Lester Tilling had turned. He had been forgiven. Chapter 41. The Tears of a King. Jay, did you get that? Chapter 41. Chapter 41, The Tears of a King. Right now we have the tears of a mouse father. But now the next chapter has something to do with the tears of a king, another father in our story. Despereaux found the king in P's room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping. Although weeping really is too small a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Idiom. To cry somebody a river is what you say to somebody who's crying that you don't really feel very sorry for. You say, oh, cry me a river, which means you could cry all you want and it's still not going to change anything. But in this case, it seems as though the king has been crying for such a long time, he's creating a true puddle beneath him. This is a literal definition of crying a river. To be human, to have their hearts diminished is nothing short of terrifying. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified, absolutely, but he spoke up anyway. Sir, the mouse said to the king, but the king did not hear him. Over and over and over, Rule of Three again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws, and much in the way of Megarry-Sow, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. Another idiom. But there was an extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he had loved the queen with the whole of his heart, so too he loved his daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she had been taken from him. Thank you, Dr. Barlow. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. Excuse me, he said. He wasn't certain, really, how a mouse should be addressing a king. Sir, did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a very long moment. He cleared his throat. King Philip stopped, beating his crown against his chest. He looked around the room. Down here, most very honorable head person, said Despereaux. Where did he get that person thing goes? He doesn't know kings. He knows head person. That's right, because that's what the Mouse Council called. It would be like you going to another country and saying, is your leader called a president? Because that's what we call ours, right? I mean, he's just saying very honored head person. So he's trying to give him the right address. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor and he squinted. Is that a bug speaking to me? He asked. No, said Despereaux. I am a mouse. We've met before. A mouse, bellowed the king. A mouse is but one step removed from a rat. Sir, said Despereaux, most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is. You do, said the king. He sniffed. He blew his nose on the royal cloak. Where? He said. And as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux, 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous tears, king-size tears, fell with an audible plop, onomatopoeia, onto Despereaux. Most very honored head person, sir, said Despereaux as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. She's in the dungeon. Liar, said the king. He sat back up. I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon. But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hiding. And only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found. Ah, said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. Do not, sir. Most very honorable head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them has taken your daughter. And if you will send... The king started humming. Me, I can't hear you. Be stopped to shout, I can't hear you. And anyway, what you say is wrong because you are a rodent and therefore a liar. He started to hum again. Me. And then he stopped and said, I have hired fortune tellers and magicians. They are coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth. I am telling you the truth, said Despereaux. I promise. But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up to his neck and pulled at the red thread. And suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light. And the knight swinging his sword, and the terrible moment when he had realized that the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if that suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him to find the Threadmaster? Master, do you remember when he was going back in time? The Threadmaster was saying this. Where is it? He says it right here in chapter. I got to go back. Shh, the mouse leaned close, and Despereaux smelled celery again, green and alive. Be brave, friend, be brave, whispered the Threadmaster. Be brave for the princess. And then he stepped back and turned and shouted, Fellow mice, the thread has been tied. The thread has been knotted. A roar of approval. Do you remember? Do you remember that the Threadmaster knew things? The Threadmaster knew things that Despereaux knew, but other mice didn't. So, of course, at this moment, this far later, you were introduced to the Threadmaster in chapter 12. And now we're in chapter 41, and he's on his way to see the Threadmaster because the Threadmaster sees. I love this part. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, here's the deal. I've taken 43 minutes of your life to read you 6 incredibly o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Do not find me at 3:30. I won't be here. I love you. I can't wait to see you again. I would love to keep reading. Please send me your verbal to visual pictures. I want to see what you guys are doing for that. Beyond that, go tell somebody a wonderful story. Go and tell somebody what you read about today. Write it down if you want. If you're a talker on paper rather than out loud, that's okay. Then go grab your own book and do some of the things that we practiced today. Go back, reread things, because you'll find new things. You'll remember things. You'll say, oh my gosh, I remember. Did you see how all of a sudden I was like, Threadmaster? And I went back and I found the Threadmaster in chapter 12. That takes practice, though. You're not going to find it as quick as me sometimes. And that's okay. Beyond that, I hope you go and make somebody smile today. I want you to go out and share the kindness and sweetness. I want you to live a life like Despereaux. I want you to enjoy yourself and don't let anybody chew through your rope. Let yourself always know where you are in this world. And if you don't know, talk to somebody. 9 o'clock in Colorado, 8 o'clock in Washington State. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And without much further ado, I love you. and get out of here. Thank you so much for being a part of our adventure today.